My name is Eleanor, and until recently, life had been a quiet solo act, a melody played softly in an empty concert hall. Losing Richard, my husband, almost 5 years ago, felt like the final curtain. Romance, companionship. Those chapters were closed. We'd built a good life in our Upper West Side brownstone, and though children never filled our rooms, the space felt complete, or so I thought. Then came the call from my niece, Sarah. Could her son, my grandnephew, Ethan, stay with me for the summer? At 65, I was decades past navigating the chaos of youth, but Sarah was in a tight spot. Ethan needed to regroup, she said, find focus before his senior year of college. She trusted me, believed my years teaching literature at Columbia could bring structure back into his life. After some hesitation, I agreed. A little company wouldn't be so bad. The brownstone had been too silent, echoing with memories, for too long. I wondered what it would be like to fill it, even briefly, with a new presence. When Ethan arrived, stepping out of a yellow cab onto my tree-lined street, I was struck by how much he'd changed. The last time I'd seen him, he was a gangly 16-year-old with big dreams and zero direction. Now, at 23, he stood at my door, a man. Broad shoulders strained against his worn denim jacket, hands were strong, and his expression held a thoughtfulness that hinted at depths I hadn't anticipated. His dark hair was cropped short, emphasizing the sharp angles of his face, and his piercing blue eyes held a quiet intelligence that caught me off guard. This was my nephew, after all, yet something about his presence instantly shifted the energy in the house, like a sudden voltage surge. Ethan wasted no time settling in. He offered to help with groceries, insisted on carrying my heavy bags up the brownstone steps, and even found himself on the fire escape garden with me on weekends, wrestling with overgrown vines and stubborn weeds. Our quiet dinners on the small kitchen table, once solitary affairs, morphed into lengthy conversations. He'd grown thoughtful, considerate, even charming in a way I hadn't expected. The way he spoke about his architecture studies at NYU, his passion for sustainable design, his dreams of building something meaningful, resonated with a forgotten part of me, a youthful idealism I thought long extinguished. One night, over a shared bottle of Pinot Grigio, I found myself utterly drawn in by his stories. He described a project he'd poured his heart into, designing affordable, eco-friendly housing for a community in the Bronx. As he spoke, his eyes lit up with that spark, that fierce dedication I vaguely remembered in myself. It was endearing, yes, but also something more, something that stirred a dormant feeling within me. I was drawn to his enthusiasm, yes, reminded of my younger self, absolutely, and that's when it happened. A small, fleeting warmth bloomed in my chest, a sensation I hadn't experienced in years. I pushed it away, dismissing it as admiration, a harmless appreciation for youth and vitality. But a nagging voice whispered it was more complicated. I reminded myself of the boundary, the uncrossable line. I was his aunt, for heaven's sake. Yet, I felt myself slipping, like losing footing on a familiar path. The days began to flow in a strange, unsettling rhythm. Ethan would rise early for runs along the Hudson River, and I'd find myself in the kitchen, brewing coffee, actually looking forward to company. Over time, our conversations deepened, the air between us subtly charged. Small things, a lingering touch as he handed me a mug, a glance held just a moment too long across the kitchen island, became loaded with unspoken meaning. I noticed the casual brush of his hand against mine in the narrow hallway, how his gaze would settle on me during dinner, a silent question hanging in the air. Then came the night of the blackout. A sudden summer storm ripped through the city, plunging our block into darkness. The brownstone became a haven of shadows and silence. Fumbling for candles, we navigated the darkened rooms. Ethan lit a few in the living room, the flickering flames casting dancing shadows on the walls, the rain pounding against the windows. It was a comforting sound, a natural lullaby that filled the unnerving silence between us. In the candlelight, he looked at me, a softness in his eyes I hadn't seen before. "Aunt Eleanor," he began, his voice low, hesitant. "Thank you for letting me stay. I know it's probably been a bit strange for you, having me around like this." "Oh, it's not strange at all," I replied, waving away his words, trying to keep the tone light, casual. "It's been a pleasure, really. The house, it feels warmer with you here." He smiled, and a warmth crept up my neck. The words had slipped out, more honest than I intended, and I wondered if he noticed the tremor in my voice. Ethan looked down at his hands, seemingly lost in thought. "Sometimes," he said after a pause, "I feel like I don't really belong anywhere. Not really at home, not really at school. It's like I'm just floating, you know?" I did know that feeling, intimately. The sense of being caught between worlds, wanting something more, something intangible, something just out of reach. I reached over, resting my hand on his. It was meant to be a comforting gesture, an auntly reassurance, but as our fingers touched, a jolt, unexpected and electrifying, ran through me. He didn't pull away. Instead, he turned his hand over, letting my fingers intertwine with his. For a long moment, suspended in the flickering candlelight, we stayed like that, neither of us daring to move, the rain a steady rhythm outside. I knew, deep down, that I should let go, that this was crossing into a forbidden territory, an intimacy that shouldn't exist between us. But I didn't pull away. In that brief touch, in that charged silence, I felt alive again, awakened from a long, quiet slumber. When I finally withdrew my hand, my heart pounded against my ribs. I looked away, pretending to adjust the throw blanket on the sofa, anything to avoid the look in his eyes. Maybe we both needed this, he whispered, his voice barely audible. The storm had passed, the power flickered back on, but the memory of that night, that touch, lingered in my mind, haunting me with a sweet, unsettling intensity. I tried to convince myself it was innocent, a simple moment of compassion during a power outage, nothing more. But every time I passed Ethan in the hallway, caught a glimpse of him sketching on the fire escape, the sensation of his hand in mine echoed back, insistent and undeniable. Days slipped by in a strange, heightened rhythm of shared meals, stolen glances, and charged silences. I found myself looking forward to his presence each morning, the clatter of his coffee mug in the kitchen, the sound of his footsteps on the creaky wooden floors. Our conversations drifted into more personal territory. My late husband, his academic anxieties, our mutual longing for purpose, for something beyond the mundane. In these intimate exchanges, I caught myself studying him, not just as a relative, but as a man. One sun-drenched afternoon, we were working side by side on the fire escape garden, finally conquering the overgrown trumpet vine. The sun beat down, casting a warm glow over the brick walls, and I was grateful for the distraction, the physical labor keeping my thoughts at bay. "I think you're better at this than I am," he joked, looking over at me, sweat beading on his forehead. He paused, pulling off his gardening gloves and wiping his brow with the back of his hand. "Well, years of practice," I replied with a chuckle, trying to keep my voice steady. But as he leaned back on his heels, watching me with that familiar, quiet intensity, I felt my pulse quicken. "Can I ask you something, Aunt Eleanor?" His tone had shifted, softened, becoming more serious. "Of course." I looked up, curious, a knot of nervousness tightening in my stomach. "Do you ever wonder if you might have done things differently? I mean, if you could go back and change things in your life?" The question took me by surprise, hitting a raw nerve. Of course, I'd wondered. Losing Richard had left a void, a gaping emptiness I hadn't managed to fill, despite years of trying to move forward. But to hear it from him, in such a tender, unguarded way, made me feel less alone in my own regrets. "Sometimes," I said, choosing my words carefully, "I suppose we all have those thoughts, don't we? About paths not taken, things left unsaid." Ethan nodded slowly, his gaze dropping to the terracotta pots as if considering my answer. "I feel like I'm at a crossroads, and I don't even know which way to go." "You're still so young, Ethan. There's plenty of time to figure things out," I offered, trying to reassure him and myself. But he looked up sharply, the intensity in his eyes startling me. "It doesn't feel that way," he murmured. And then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he added, "Sometimes I feel like I want things that I shouldn't." The words hung in the air between us, heavy, unresolved, charged with an unspoken tension. A shiver ran down my spine. The weight of his gaze pressed on me, and the truth of his words settled in, undeniable and unsettling. I wanted to respond, to ease the tension, to deflect the uncomfortable intimacy, but my mind was a chaotic swirl of thoughts and emotions. I wasn't sure exactly what he was implying, yet a part of me understood, all too well. After that conversation on the fire escape, something subtly shifted between us. We began to dance around each other, carefully, like magnets drawn together, yet afraid of colliding. I found myself hyper-aware of his every movement, every gesture. When he walked into the kitchen, I could sense his presence even without turning to look. In the quiet evenings, as we shared a glass of wine or watched an old movie on Turner Classic Movies, the silence between us felt loaded, brimming with words unsaid, desires unacknowledged. One evening, we were sitting in the living room watching a black and white film noir, one of Richard's favorites. Ethan was sprawled out on the couch, his arm draped over the backrest, while I sat in my usual armchair, trying to focus on the screen, to ignore the magnetic pull he exerted. But when he laughed at a particularly witty line, a deep, resonant sound that vibrated through the quiet room, I couldn't resist looking over at him. He caught my gaze and held it, his expression unreadable in the dim light. For a moment, suspended in the flickering light of the television screen, neither of us spoke. My heart thumped in my chest, each beat louder than the last. "You have this look sometimes," he said quietly, his voice barely above a murmur, "like you're somewhere else. Like you're thinking of something you can't tell me." I felt a blush creep up my cheeks, flustered by how well he seemed to see through me, to sense the turmoil beneath the surface. "Maybe I am," I replied, hoping my voice didn't betray my sudden nervousness. Ethan tilted his head, his gaze unwavering, searching. "You can tell me anything, you know. I won't judge you." The sincerity in his words took my breath away. For a moment, a reckless, dangerous moment, I wondered if I could trust him. Truly trust him, with the tangled thoughts I'd been suppressing, the forbidden feelings I'd been trying to bury. But no, it was too dangerous, too risky. I couldn't let myself go down that path, no matter how tempting it felt. Still, the words slipped out, unbidden, before I could stop them. "I think about what my life would be like if things had turned out differently." Ethan leaned forward, his eyes searching mine, intense and questioning. "And what do you see?" I swallowed, feeling my heart race, the unspoken question hanging heavy in the air. I see myself feeling free and happy, but it's just a fantasy." "Why does it have to be?" he whispered, his voice thick with something that made my skin tingle, a raw emotion I couldn't quite name. He reached out, his hand hovering just inches from mine, the space between us suddenly electric, charged with unspoken desire. I could feel his warmth, his presence, drawing me in, pulling me under. I wanted to pull away, to tell him to stop, to reestablish the boundaries, to retreat to the safe, familiar territory of aunt and nephew. But something inside me held me there, frozen, captivated. His fingers brushed mine, the slightest touch sending a thrill, a jolt of forbidden pleasure up my arm. And I felt my resolve, my carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble. For the first time in years, I felt alive, desired, seen. But just as quickly as the moment had arrived, it was over. I pulled my hand away, standing up abruptly, my heart pounding in my chest. I think I need some fresh air," I stammered, not daring to look at him as I practically fled to the front door. I could feel his gaze following me, burning into my back, and part of me, a reckless, desperate part, wanted him to reach out, to stop me, to pull me back. But he didn't, and I slipped outside into the cool New York night, the city sounds a distant hum, my thoughts a chaotic, terrifying whirlwind. The following days passed in a blur of confusion and self-doubt. I tried to avoid Ethan as much as possible, burying myself in household chores, in long walks through Central Park, in anything to distract myself from the longing that gnawed at me, the forbidden desire that refused to be silenced. But no matter how hard I tried to push it away, the memory of his touch, of that charged moment in the living room lingered, a forbidden melody playing on repeat in my mind. My friend, Sophia, called one afternoon, her voice laced with concern. We'd been friends since college, over 40 years, and there was little I could hide from her perceptive gaze, even over the phone. "Eleanor, you sound distracted," she observed, her voice sharp, knowing. "Is everything all right?" I hesitated, unsure how much I could confide, how much I dared to admit, even to my closest friend. But the need to unburden myself, to speak the unspeakable, was overwhelming. "Ethan, but he's been staying with me, helping around the house," I began slowly, cautiously. "And, well, it's been complicated." "Complicated?" Sophia's tone sharpened, and I could almost picture her raising an eyebrow in suspicion. "Eleanor, don't tell me you're getting attached." I bit my lip, struggling to find the right words, to explain the impossible, to justify the unjustifiable. "It's not like that," I insisted, though even I didn't fully believe it. "It's just, he's so different from what I expected. I find myself feeling things I haven't felt in a long time." Sophia was silent for a long moment, and I braced myself for a lecture, for the inevitable warnings. But when she finally spoke, her voice was surprisingly gentle, laced with understanding. "Listen, Eleanor, you're a grown woman, and I can't tell you what to do. But be careful. Feelings can be powerful, and sometimes they lead us down paths we don't expect." Her words echoed in my mind long after we hung up, A stark warning, a cold splash of reality. I knew she was right, of course. I was treading on dangerous ground, letting myself get swept away by emotions I'd long since buried. Emotions that had no place, no right to exist. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't seem to let go of the longing, the yearning that had taken root in my heart. The days stretched into an intoxicating, dangerous blend of quiet moments, stolen glances, late-night silences that spoke volumes. I tried to distance myself, to rebuild the walls, to preserve the boundaries that had begun to blur, to dissolve. But some part of me, a reckless, defiant part, kept pulling me back to him, like a moth drawn to a flickering flame. There was a magnetism between us, undeniable, growing stronger with each passing day. One evening, after a long day of weeding the fire escape garden and sorting through dusty boxes of Richard's old papers in the attic, Ethan suggested we unwind with a glass of wine on the stoop. The evening air was warm, thick with the scent of summer blooms from the nearby park, and I felt my resolve softening, melting away like ice cream on a hot sidewalk. We settled onto the steps, gazing out at the darkening streetscape, the city lights beginning to twinkle. "You know," he said after a long silence, swirling the wine in his glass, "it feels like I've known you my whole life, Aunt Eleanor, in a way that's different from anyone else." I glanced at him, feeling a familiar warmth rise in my chest, a dangerous warmth. "We do have a connection, Ethan," I replied, choosing my words with extreme care, walking a tightrope of truth and denial. "But it's a complicated one." He turned to look at me, his face softened by the glow of the porch light, the city lights reflecting in his blue eyes. "What makes it so complicated?" he asked, his voice quiet, his gaze unwavering, demanding honesty. "Ethan," I began, but my voice faltered, the words catching in my throat. How could I explain the lines we were crossing, the forbidden territory we were entering, without sounding like I was confessing my own dangerous desires? Because it isn't meant to be like this. You're my nephew." He reached out, placing a hand on my arm, his touch warm, grounding, dangerously reassuring. "Does it really matter, Aunt Eleanor?" His voice was barely a whisper, but the sincerity in his eyes cut through me like a blade, sharp and undeniable. Maybe we're here for a reason. At this time, in this place. I searched his face, torn between my ingrained sense of propriety, the fear of societal judgment, and the overwhelming, undeniable desire that had been building inside me, threatening to consume me. I wanted to believe him, to surrender to the moment, to let go of the fear that held me captive. But some part of me, a deeply ingrained, stubbornly persistent part, still clung to my carefully crafted life, to the illusion of control, to the safety of the familiar. He must have sensed my hesitation, my internal struggle, because he gently pulled his hand back, offering a sad, almost resigned smile. "I don't want to make you uncomfortable," he murmured, his voice barely audible, laced with disappointment. I looked at him, feeling a pang of guilt mixed with an intense, almost desperate longing. "It's not that," I said quickly, too quickly. "It's just, I don't know what's right anymore." For a long moment, we sat in silence, each lost in our own tangled thoughts, the city sounds fading into a distant hum. And then, almost as if guided by some unspoken agreement, some irresistible force, we both leaned in at the same time, our faces inches apart. I could feel his breath warm against my skin, his gaze locked on mine, holding me captive as the world around us faded into nothingness. And then, finally, our lips met. In a soft, tentative kiss, a brush of warmth and softness that sent a jolt of electricity, a forbidden thrill, through my entire body. It was a kiss unlike any I had ever experienced, filled with both a quiet reverence, a hesitant tenderness, and an undeniable underlying passion, as if we were both afraid to break the fragile spell, to shatter the delicate illusion. We pulled away after a moment, both of us breathing heavily, our eyes locked in silent understanding. No words were necessary. The kiss had spoken volumes, had voiced everything we hadn't dared to articulate, everything we had tried to suppress. And though a part of me, a rational, terrified part, knew we were treading on dangerous ground, crossing a line that should never be crossed, I also knew with a terrifying certainty that there was no going back. The days that followed felt like a dream, a surreal, beautiful, dangerous dream, where reality held little sway, where consequences seemed distant and unreal. Ethan and I shared more moments like that, stolen moments, brief but electrifying, each kiss, each touch leaving me feeling more alive, more vibrant than I had in years. But even as we grew closer, as the unspoken desire between us intensified, the shadow of guilt, of fear, hung over me, whispering warnings, reminding me of the precariousness of our situation, the impossibility of our connection. I was too afraid, too intoxicated to heed them. One afternoon, as I was preparing dinner, the aroma of simmering tomato sauce filling the kitchen, Sophia called again. Her voice held a hint of alarm, of urgent concern, as she asked about my summer with Ethan. I tried to keep my tone light, dismissive, to reassure her that everything was fine, that she was worrying unnecessarily, but Sophia wasn't easily fooled. "Eleanor," she said firmly, her voice brooking no argument, "I know you, and I can tell something's going on. You sound different. Distant, troubled." I hesitated, feeling a pang of anxiety, a sudden wave of guilt at the thought of confessing, of admitting the truth to her, to anyone. But I knew I couldn't keep it hidden forever. The secret was too heavy, too dangerous to carry alone. Taking a deep breath, I told her, cautiously, vaguely, about the bond that had formed between Ethan and me. I carefully omitted the more intimate details, the kisses, the touches, the forbidden desires. She was silent for a long time, the silence stretching out, heavy and ominous. And when she finally spoke, her voice was filled with both sympathy and a chilling premonitory caution. "Eleanor, you're a grown woman, and I can't tell you what to do. But be careful. Feelings can be powerful, and sometimes they lead us down paths we don't expect, paths that can destroy us." Her words lingered in my mind long after we hung up, a chilling prophecy, a stark reminder of the potential consequences. And as I turned back to the simmering sauce, a renewed sense of doubt, of fear, washed over me. Was I truly in control of my actions, or was I letting my emotions, my long-dormant desires, cloud my judgment, lead me towards disaster? That night, as Ethan and I sat together in the living room, the city lights twinkling outside the window, I felt the weight of Sophia's warning pressing down on me, heavy and suffocating. He noticed my unease, my sudden withdrawal, and after a few minutes of strained silence, he turned to me, his brow furrowed in concern. "Is something wrong?" he asked, his voice gentle, laced with worry. I hesitated, unsure how to explain the turmoil raging within me, the conflicting emotions tearing me apart. But I knew I couldn't keep it bottled up forever. The pressure was too intense, too unbearable. Taking a deep breath, I looked at him, my voice trembling as I spoke the words that had been circling in my mind, the words I dreaded to utter. "Ryan, I don't know if this is right. I keep thinking about what people would say if they knew about us." He reached out, taking my hand in his touch warm, reassuring, a dangerous comfort. "Does it matter what people think?" he asked softly, his gaze searching mine. What we have, it feels real to me." I looked down at our intertwined hands, my heart aching with a confusing mix of love and fear, desire and guilt. "It does feel real," I whispered, the admission a painful release, "but I'm afraid. I'm afraid of what it means, and what it could cost us." He squeezed my hand gently, his eyes filled with understanding, with a shared sorrow. "I don't want to hurt you, Aunt Eleanor, and I don't want you to do anything that feels wrong to you. But I also don't want to lose this, whatever it is we have." His words struck a chord deep within me, resonating with the conflicting desires that warred within my soul. And I felt tears prickling at the corners of my eyes, a mix of grief and longing, of fear and a desperate, forbidden hope. I knew he was right, that what we had, whatever it was something rare, something beautiful, something worth cherishing, worth fighting for. But I also knew that the real world outside our secluded brownstone, was not kind to those who defied its conventions, who dared to break its rules. And I wasn't sure, not at all sure, if I was strong enough, brave enough to face the inevitable consequences. In the days that followed, I wrestled with my conflicting feelings, torn between the desperate desire to hold on to Ethan, to surrender to the forbidden love that had blossomed between us, and the paralyzing fear of the repercussions, the potential destruction. Every time I looked at him, at his youthful energy, his unwavering gaze, his quiet tenderness, I felt my resolve weakening, my heart pulling me closer to him. Despite my misgivings, despite the warnings echoing in my mind. One evening, as we sat together in the quiet of the living room, the city sounds muted, the air thick with unspoken emotions. He looked at me with a tenderness that made my heart ache, a tenderness that mirrored my own forbidden feelings. "I don't want to make things harder for you," he murmured, his voice filled with sincerity, with a painful resignation. If you want me to go, I'll understand. I'll do whatever you need." The thought of losing him, of returning to the suffocating silence of my solitary life, was unbearable. A surge of panic, cold and sharp, washed over me at the very idea. But I also knew that I couldn't continue living in this state of constant uncertainty, this agonizing fear, this precarious balance on the edge of a precipice. I needed to make a choice, a definitive choice, one way or the other. Taking a deep breath, steeling myself for the pain, for the inevitable loss, I looked at him, my heart heavy with the weight of my decision, my voice trembling, barely audible as I spoke the words that would change everything. Maybe it's time," I said quietly, my voice filled with a profound sadness, a deep, inconsolable grief. He nodded slowly, his expression a mirror of my own sorrow, filled with understanding and a heartbreaking resignation. "I'll go, if that's what you want," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, the words hanging in the air between us, a final, devastating farewell. As he packed his things the next morning, the brownstone felt hollow, already echoing with his absence. A sense of emptiness, vast and suffocating, settled over me, a hollow ache in my chest that I knew would take a long time, perhaps a lifetime to heal. But beneath the crushing sadness, I also felt a strange, unexpected sense of relief, a weight lifted from my shoulders, a burden finally released. As I watched his yellow cab disappear down the street, swallowed by the New York traffic, I knew, with a painful certainty, that I had done what was right, what was necessary, even if it broke my heart into a million pieces. After Ethan left, the brownstone became unbearably silent, a tomb of memories. I had lived alone for years, had become accustomed to the quiet solitude, but now the silence felt different, heavier, oppressive. Every room, every corner, held a painful reminder of him, the faint scent of his cologne that lingered in the living room, the books he'd left behind on the shelves, his sketches scattered on the desk, the echoes of his laughter in the empty rooms. I spent the first few days in a daze, drifting from room to room, aimless, unable to settle, each day finding myself glancing at the street, at the empty parking space, half hoping, against all reason, to see his cab pull back up, to see him walk back through the door. I knew it was foolish, a desperate fantasy, but I couldn't shake the profound emptiness that had settled in my chest, the gaping hole where his presence had been. Sophia called often, checking in on me, her voice a soothing balm, a lifeline to the world outside my self-imposed isolation. She didn't press me for details, didn't demand explanations, but I could hear the deep concern in her tone, the gentle reminders that life would move on, that time, eventually, would smooth over the sharp edges of grief, would eventually heal even the deepest wounds. But deep down, I knew that it wasn't just time I needed. I needed closure, a way to make sense of what had happened, to understand why I had let myself fall so deeply, so recklessly into something I knew, from the beginning, could never last. One evening, weeks later, I sat on the stoop, sipping a glass of wine, watching the sunset paint the New York skyline in hues of orange and purple, as memories of our stolen summer together washed over me, bittersweet and poignant. I thought of his laughter, the way his eyes would light up when he spoke about his architectural dreams, the quiet moments we'd shared on the fire escape, the forbidden touches that had made me feel young, alive again. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the street, I let out a long sigh, a breath of acceptance, of reluctant understanding. Maybe, just maybe, I hadn't fallen in love with him entirely, not in the conventional romantic sense. Perhaps it was the feeling he awakened in me, the dormant spark he reignited, the reminder of a part of myself, a vibrant, passionate self, that I'd long buried, convinced was gone forever. The part of me that yearned for companionship, for connection, for the thrill of something new, something unexpected, even something forbidden. In that moment, watching the last rays of sunlight fade, I understood, with a quiet clarity, that what I had felt, what we had shared wasn't wrong, not entirely. It had been a catalyst, a necessary spark that had reignited something essential inside me, reminding me of my capacity to feel deeply, to love fiercely, even at this stage in my life. Several weeks turned into months, And slowly, gradually, I began to find a fragile peace with the experience, with the loss, with the bittersweet memories. I threw myself back into my gardening, tending to the fire escape oasis with a renewed dedication. I spent more time with Sophia, rediscovering the comfort of old friendship. And I even joined a local book club, venturing back into the community, reconnecting with the world outside my brownstone walls. But there were still moments, quiet nights when the loneliness crept back in, a familiar ache in the silence, and I'd catch myself reaching for my phone, a fleeting, foolish temptation to call him, to hear his voice just once more, to break the self-imposed silence. One afternoon, while grocery shopping at Zabar's, a bustling Upper West Side institution, I was startled by the sight of someone who looked remarkably like Ethan, standing just a few feet away in the produce aisle, examining avocados with a critical eye. My heart skipped a beat, a jolt of recognition, of longing, a sudden rush of that familiar thrill. For a moment, suspended in time, I felt that forbidden connection, that magnetic pull. But as I looked closer, really looked, I realized it wasn't him. Just someone with the same tall frame, the same dark hair, the same casual denim jacket. A wave of disappointment washed over me, quickly followed by a strange sense of relief, a quiet acceptance. It was as though the universe, in its own subtle way, was reminding me that he was gone, that I needed to let go, to move forward, to embrace the future, whatever it held. Later that night, as I sat alone in my quiet brownstone, the city sounds a distant lullaby, I realized that I had already begun to heal. I could think of him now without the sharp, agonizing ache in my chest, without the overwhelming sense of loss. Instead, I felt a gentle warmth, a quiet fondness for the memories we'd shared, and a peaceful acceptance of what had been and what could never be. Months turned into seasons, the summer heat fading into the crisp autumn air, then the biting winter winds, and by the time spring began to bloom again in Central Park, I had settled into a comfortable routine, a quiet contentment. The sharp pain of Ethan's absence had faded, softened, replaced by a sense of peace, of quiet gratitude. I knew now that his visit, however brief, however complicated, had been a gift, a painful, beautiful gift, a reminder of the enduring beauty of life, the unexpected joy of human connection, and the vital importance of allowing oneself to feel, to love, even if it meant risking heartache, even if it meant facing the inevitable pain of loss. One sunny afternoon, while attending a spring garden party with Sophia, amidst the blooming tulips and the gentle murmur of conversation, I met someone new. A man named Henry, a retired history professor from Columbia, with kind eyes, a gentle smile, and an easy, engaging laugh. We struck up a conversation, a casual exchange about books and city life, and I found myself genuinely enjoying his company, feeling a flicker of interest, a spark of possibility that surprised and warmed me. As we spoke, amidst the laughter and the scent of blooming flowers, I thought of Ethan, of the tumultuous journey that had brought me to this unexpected moment, to this quiet possibility of new connection. And I realized, with a sense of quiet hope, that I was ready, finally ready, to move forward. The experience with Ethan, the forbidden summer, had opened my heart, had reminded me of my enduring capacity for connection, for affection, for life itself. And now, standing in the sunshine, talking to Henry, I felt prepared, tentatively hopeful, to embrace whatever the future held, whatever unexpected paths lay ahead. Henry and I exchanged numbers, a simple gesture, a quiet promise. And as I walked back to my car that evening, the city lights beginning to twinkle, I felt a renewed sense of hope, a lightness in my step, a quiet joy I hadn't felt in years. A year after Ethan's summer visit, the anniversary passing with a quiet, reflective ache, I found myself thinking about everything that had happened, about the subtle, profound ways it had changed me, shifted my perspective, reshaped my understanding of myself and my life. I had grown in ways I hadn't anticipated, learning to embrace life's inherent uncertainties, to open myself to new experiences, even at my age, and most importantly, to let go of the grip of the past, to release the ghosts that had haunted me for so long. Every so often, in quiet moments, I'd still think of Ethan, a fleeting memory, a passing thought, a ghost of a summer love. I wondered where he was now, what he was doing, if he had found his direction, his purpose, if he ever thought of me, if he remembered those stolen moments, those forbidden touches we'd shared in the quiet intimacy of my brownstone. But I no longer felt the sharp ache of longing, no longer felt the desperate need to hold on to something that was always meant to be temporary, ephemeral. Instead, I felt a quiet gratitude for the time we'd spent together, for the way he had, in his own unexpected way, helped me rediscover a part of myself I'd thought was lost forever, a part of myself I hadn't realized I'd been missing so deeply. And as I sat on the stoop, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, a familiar, comforting ritual, I knew that I was finally truly at peace. Life, I had learned, had a way of surprising us, of leading us down unexpected paths, some joyful, some painful, some forbidden. But the key, I was beginning to understand, was to trust the journey, to accept the beauty and the pain, the joy and the sorrow that inevitably came with it. And as the sky turned to twilight, the city lights twinkling like distant stars, I smiled, a quiet, knowing smile, feeling a profound sense of contentment, of acceptance, knowing that I was ready, finally ready, for whatever came next, whatever unexpected chapters life still had in store. 2 years had passed since Ethan's summer visit, 2 years since the forbidden kisses, the whispered confessions, the bittersweet goodbye. The seasons had come and gone, each leaving its subtle, indelible mark on the old brownstone, the house I had slowly, gently come to appreciate in a new way, a way that encompassed both the echoes of the past and the quiet promise of the future. Life had softened around the edges, the once sharp pains of loss and longing had dulled, replaced by a quiet sense of contentment, a gentle acceptance of the ebb and flow of time. Henry and I had continued to see each other, our companionship deepening, blossoming into something I hadn't anticipated, something unexpected and profoundly comforting. We shared many evenings together, filled with warm conversations about books and history, comfortable silences punctuated by the sounds of the city, both of us understanding, respecting, the importance of giving each other space, the freedom to breathe, to be ourselves, fully and completely. I no longer sought the intensity of young passion, the dizzying thrill of the unknown, the reckless abandon of forbidden desire. What I had now with Henry was different, quieter, steadier, a gentle current of affection and mutual respect, deeply fulfilling in its own understated way. One brisk autumn afternoon, the leaves turning vibrant shades of amber and crimson, painting the city in breathtaking hues. As I sat on the stoop with a steaming cup of Earl Grey tea, watching the leaves drift down from the ancient oak tree across the street, I thought of Ethan, a fleeting, gentle thought. I didn't dwell on him often anymore, the memories fading into a soft nostalgia, a bittersweet echo of a summer long past. But every so often, like today, memories of that intense, forbidden summer would drift back to me, tinged with a poignant sweetness, a quiet ache of remembrance. I wondered where he was now, what he was doing, if he had found his direction, his purpose, if he was building the eco-friendly homes he'd dreamed of. In a way, I felt he had left me with more than just memories, more than just a bittersweet ache. He had given me something invaluable, something transformative. He had given me the courage to let go of my carefully constructed past, to open myself to new experiences, to new possibilities, even at this unexpected stage of my life. I took a slow sip of my tea, breathing in the crisp autumn air, feeling the cool breeze brush against my cheek. The world felt different now, quieter, calmer, not in the way it had that summer, with its electric charge, its unspoken desires, its dangerous undercurrents, but in a way that was peaceful, steady, grounding. I felt connected, rooted, not just to the brownstone, not just to the city, but to myself, to my own life, in a way that I hadn't before, in a way that was both surprising and deeply comforting. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow across the street, painting the brownstone in warm autumnal light, I smiled, a quiet, contented smile, feeling a deep, abiding joy, a quiet happiness that I hadn't known was possible, hadn't dared to hope for. Life, I had learned, in its unpredictable, often bewildering wisdom, had brought me unexpected challenges, moments of intense passion and profound loss, deep reflection and quiet transformation. But it had also ultimately brought me to this place, this quiet haven of peace, this unexpected contentment. And as I watched the last rays of sunlight fade into twilight, painting the autumn sky in breathtaking hues, I knew that I was ready, finally ready, for whatever came next, whatever unexpected beauty, whatever unforeseen challenges life still had in store.